Ghastly Garlic Episode 8. 8 Real Ghost Stories, a collection of paranormal hospital tales. Chapter 1. The Lady in White. The hospital loomed over the city like a monolithic tombstone, its aged facade a patchwork of weathered brick and cracked mortar. Long corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, echoing the footfalls of hurried nurses and the distant hum of machinery. It was a place where life and death met, often clashing in silent battles within sterile, fluorescent-lit rooms. This place had its stories, whispers of things unseen, of the supernatural threading its way through the daily monotony, but none were as persistent, as chilling as the legend of the Lady in White. Maggie, a night shift nurse, had been at the hospital for 5 years. She had heard the stories countless times. A woman dressed in an ethereal white gown, her face shrouded in an almost unnatural pallor, drifting through the hall. Some said she sought her lost child. Others believed she was a patient who had died tragically, unable to move on. Maggie didn't believe in ghosts, or at least she told herself she didn't. Yet there was always an underlying unease, a prickling of the skin, whenever she worked the night shift. On this particular night, a heavy fog had settled around the hospital, wrapping it in an opaque blanket. The emergency room was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual chaos. Maggie found herself in the pediatric wing, checking on the children who were either too sick to be sent home or awaiting surgeries. She pushed a cart, laden with medicine and charts, her footsteps muffled by the linoleum floor. As she rounded a corner, Maggie froze. Down the hall she saw her, the Lady in White. The figure was indistinct at first, a blur against the dim lighting. But as Maggie blinked and focused, the apparition became clearer. The woman's gown flowed like mist, her hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. She seemed to be gliding, her feet never quite touching the ground. Maggie's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to turn and run, but something compelled her to stay. She took a tentative step forward, the cart creaking under her trembling grip. The Lady in White turned her head slowly, and Maggie felt the weight of her gaze, hollow, sorrowful eyes that seemed to pierce through her. "Can I help you?" Maggie's voice wavered, barely above a whisper. The ghostly figure did not respond. Instead, she raised an arm, pointing down the hall before vanishing as abruptly as she had appeared. Maggie stood there, breathless, trying to process what she had seen. The air around her felt colder, the shadows deeper. She knew she had to follow. Curiosity, dread, and an inexplicable sense of duty drove her forward. Maggie walked down the hall, her eyes scanning every corner. She reached a door at the end, one she rarely entered the old wing of the hospital, long since closed off and left to decay. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a dark corridor lined with empty rooms and broken equipment. The smell of dust and mildew assaulted her senses. As she stepped inside, Maggie's flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the wall. Her breath came out in shallow puffs, visible in the cold air. She moved cautiously, each step echoing in the silence. Her mind raced with questions. Why had the Lady in White led her here? What was she supposed to find? In the gloom, Maggie noticed a faint light coming from one of the rooms. She approached it, heart hammering against her ribs. Inside, she found an old hospital bed, rusted and decayed, with leather restraints hanging limply from its sides. Papers were strewn across the floor, and in the corner, a small, worn teddy bear sat propped against the wall. She bent down, picking up the bear. It was covered in dust, its fur matted and threadbare. A sense of profound sadness washed over her, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. As she stood, something caught her eye, a journal, half hidden under the bed. She picked it up and opened the fragile cover. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with spidery handwriting. It belonged to a nurse named Lila, who had worked in the hospital decades ago. As Maggie read, the story unfolded, a tale of a young girl, Emily, who had been admitted for a rare and terminal illness. Despite the treatments, Emily's condition worsened, and she passed away in this very room, her mother, a woman named Catherine, by her side. The grief-stricken mother had never left the hospital, her spirit bound by the unbearable sorrow of losing her only child. Maggie's hands shook as she closed the journal. The pieces clicked into place. The lady in white was Catherine, doomed to wander the halls in search of her lost daughter. The teddy bear had been Emily's, a cherished comfort during her final days. Suddenly, a soft, keening wail filled the room, sending a shiver down Maggie's spine. She turned, and there stood Catherine, her form more solid, more real. The ghostly woman's eyes were filled with tears, her hand outstretched towards the bear. Maggie held it out, her own tears flowing freely. "I'm so sorry," Maggie whispered, placing the bear gently on the bed. Catherine's form shimmered, a look of gratitude passing over her features before she slowly faded, leaving behind an overwhelming silence. Maggie felt an odd sense of peace, mingled with lingering sadness. She had helped the lady in white find a semblance of closure, but the hospital would never be free of its ghosts. Weeks passed, and the story of Maggie's encounter spread among the staff. Some were skeptical, others fascinated, but all agreed that something had changed in the hospital. The eerie feeling that had pervaded the nights seemed to lift, though the legend of the lady in white remained. Maggie returned to her routine, the memory of that night a constant companion. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, more spirits tethered to the hospital's dark history. One evening, while she was charting patient information, a young man approached her. His face was pale, his eyes hollow with fear. "I've been seeing things," he said, his voice trembling. "A woman dressed in white. She asked me to find you." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. The lady in white had found someone else. The hospital's shadows were far from banished. They merely waited, hidden in the corners, biding their time. And so, Maggie knew, her journey through the spectral corridors was far from over. The hospital still held secrets, and the lady in white was just one of many restless souls waiting to be heard. Chapter 2. The Phantom Surgeon. The hospital, an imposing structure of grey concrete and glass, stood silent against the night sky. Its windows, darkened for the night, reflected the moonlight in eerie patterns. This was a place of healing, but also a place where life and death collided in constant, unseen battle. It was also a place of whispers and shadows, where tales of the supernatural blended seamlessly with the sterile reality of modern medicine. Among these tales, none was more chilling than that of the Phantom Surgeon. Emily, a newly hired nurse, had heard the stories since her first day. The Phantom Surgeon was a ghostly figure, clad in surgical scrubs and a mask, who was said to haunt the operating rooms and surgical wards. He was often associated with unexplained noises, misplaced instruments, and the chilling sensation of being watched. Emily was skeptical, attributing the stories to the overactive imaginations of exhausted staff. That was, until she encountered the Phantom herself. It was a quiet night, the kind that lulled staff into a false sense of security. Emily was on the surgical ward, overseeing patients who had undergone major operations earlier in the day. She walked the dimly lit halls, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The hospital seemed unusually still, as if holding its breath. As Emily checked on her patients, she noticed something odd. Surgical instruments, meticulously organized earlier, were now scattered across the counters. She frowned, her brow furrowing. She was certain everything had been in order before. Dismissing it as a colleague's oversight, she began to tidy up. Suddenly, a soft, clinking sound made her pause. She turned towards the source and saw a scalpel rolling across the counter by itself. Her heart skipped a beat. She glanced around, but the ward was empty. Emily's rational mind struggled to explain the occurrence, but a growing unease settled in her gut. Determined to shake off the feeling, Emily continued her rounds. As she entered an empty operating room, the temperature seemed to drop. She rubbed her arms, trying to ward off the chill. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the emergency lights. She moved towards the supply cabinet, intending to restock the instruments that had mysteriously moved. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure. Emily froze. The figure was dressed in surgical scrubs and a mask, standing perfectly still in the shadowed corner of the room. Her pulse quickened, and she forced herself to turn and face it, but as she did, the figure vanished. The room was empty once more. Emily's breath came in short gasps. She had heard the stories, but experiencing it was something else entirely. She backed out of the room, her eyes darting around, expecting the figure to reappear at any moment. She nearly collided with Dr. Sam, one of the senior surgeons, who was making his late-night rounds. "Emily, are you all right?" Dr. Sam asked, his face etched with concern. I think I saw him," Emily stammered. "The phantom surgeon." Dr. Sam's expression shifted, a mix of sympathy and apprehension. "Come with me," he said, leading her to the break room. "Over a cup of coffee." Doctor Sam told her the story in detail. The phantom surgeon was believed to be Dr. Harlan, a brilliant but troubled surgeon from decades past. According to legend, Dr. Harlan had been performing a complex surgery when he suffered a heart attack and died on the operating table. Unable to accept his death, his spirit remained forever trapped in the hospital, continuing his work from beyond the grave. "I've seen him too, Doctor," Sam admitted quietly. "Most of us have at one point or another. It's usually harmless, strange noises, things moving on their own. But sometimes it's more." Emily listened, her fear mingling with curiosity. She had always been fascinated by the supernatural, but this was different. This was real. In the following weeks, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Instruments continued to move on their own, and cold spots appeared in the warmest rooms. She started to hear faint whispers, words she couldn't quite make out. The staff was used to these occurrences, but for Emily, each one was a reminder of her encounter. One night, while working late, Emily was called to assist in an emergency surgery. A car accident victim had been brought in and the situation was dire. She joined Dr. Sam and the surgical team, donning her scrubs and mask. The operating room was a flurry of activity, the tension palpable. As the surgery progressed, Emily's unease grew. The air seemed thicker, the shadows deeper. She felt a presence, a cold gaze watching her every move. When she glanced at the observation gallery, she saw him. The phantom surgeon stood there, his eyes locked on her. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Suddenly the monitors beeped frantically. The patient was crashing. Dr. Sam barked orders and the team scrambled to stabilize him. Emily reached for a clamp, but it wasn't where it should be. Panic surged through her. She glanced around, spotting the instrument on the far side of the table. As she reached for it, a hand, cold, firm, closed over hers. Emily gasped, staring into the eyes of the phantom surgeon. His grip was strong, his expression intense. He guided her hand, placing the clamp exactly where it needed to be. The monitors stabilized, the crisis averted. And then, just as suddenly, he was gone. The surgery ended successfully, but Emily was shaken. She confided in Dr. Sam, who listened with a grave expression. "It's as if he's trying to help," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Or maybe he's trying to finish what he started," Dr. Sam replied. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's encounters with the phantom surgeon continued. He appeared during surgeries, his presence felt but rarely seen. Instruments moved on their own, doors opened and closed with no apparent cause. The staff had grown accustomed to these occurrences, but for Emily, they were a constant reminder of the hospital's haunted past. One night, as she prepared to leave, Emily found herself drawn to the surgical ward. The halls were deserted, the lights dimmed. She walked slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She entered the operating room where she had first seen him, the air heavy with anticipation. There, in the center of the room, stood the phantom surgeon. His eyes, filled with an unearthly glow, met hers. Emily felt a strange connection, a pull she couldn't resist. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out. "Who are you?" she whispered. The phantom's gaze softened, and for a moment Emily saw the man behind the legend. Dr. Harlan, a dedicated surgeon, trapped between worlds. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't hear. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. Emily stood alone in the darkened room, her mind racing. She had to know more. She delved into the hospital's archives, poring over old records and newspaper clippings. She learned about Dr. Harlan's brilliance, his dedication, and his tragic death. But there was something else, a rumor that had been buried over the years. Dr. Harlan had been accused of malpractice. A young patient had died on his table, and the grief had driven him to the brink. His colleagues had covered for him, but the guilt had weighed heavily on his mind. The night he died, he had been performing an unauthorized surgery, trying to save a patient and redeem himself. Emily's heart ached for the tormented spirit. She realized that Dr. Harlan wasn't just haunting the hospital, he was seeking redemption, trying to save lives even in death. One stormy night, the hospital was plunged into darkness by a power outage. The backup generators kicked in, but the atmosphere was charged with tension. Emily was in the surgical ward, checking on patients by flashlight. The air was thick with anticipation, and she knew something was about to happen. As she passed the operating room, the door creaked open. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was cold, the shadows deeper than usual. Her flashlight flickered, and then she saw him. The phantom surgeon stood by the operating table, his eyes locked on her. "Help me," he whispered, his voice a faint echo. Emily's heart pounded. She approached the table, her hands trembling. Instruments lay scattered, as if waiting for her. She understood. Dr. Harlan needed her help to finish what he had started. Guided by an unseen force, Emily began to arrange the instruments. Her hands moved with a confidence that wasn't her own, as if Dr. Harlan was guiding her. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the air crackling with electricity. Suddenly the door slammed shut. Emily jumped, her flashlight clattering to the floor. The room was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the emergency lights. She felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and she turned to see Dr. Harlan standing beside her. "Finish it," he whispered. Emily took a deep breath, her fear giving way to determination. She picked up the scalpel, her hand steady. The room seemed to blur, reality shifting as she performed the surgery. She didn't know how, but she knew exactly what to do. Time lost all meaning as she worked, her movements precise and deliberate. She felt a connection to Dr. Harlan, a bond that transcended the physical world. As the final suture was placed, a sense of peace settled over her. The room brightened, the oppressive darkness lifting. Emily looked around, but Dr. Harlan was gone. The air felt lighter, the cold spots gone. She knew he had found his redemption, his spirit finally at peace. In the days that followed, the hospital returned to normal. The eerie occurrences ceased, and the staff felt a sense of relief. But for Emily, the experience had left a lasting impression. She continued her work with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to honor Dr. Harlan's legacy. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey wasn't over. The hospital held many secrets, and she knew there were other spirits, other stories waiting to be uncovered. The legend of the phantom surgeon had ended, but the shadows of the hospital still held many mysteries. And so Emily remained, a guardian of the night, ready to face whatever came next. The hospital was a place of healing, but also a place of whispers and shadows, where the past and present intertwined in a dance of life and death. And in the depths of the night she would be there, listening to the whispers, ready to uncover the next chapter in the hospital's haunted history. Chapter 3. The Crying Child. In the heart of the city, overshadowed by towering buildings, stood a hospital. It was a place of both hope and despair, where the line between life and death blurred with each passing day. Among the whispered tales that echoed through its corridors was the legend of the crying child. Every nurse, doctor, and patient had heard the stories, a child's laughter or cries echoing through the empty halls and deserted patient rooms. Some said it was the spirit of a child who had passed away within those walls, while others believed it was a trick of the mind, a manifestation of grief and longing. Regardless of the origin, one thing was certain: the sounds were haunting and impossible to ignore. Dr. Arjun had just begun his tenure at the hospital, eager to make a difference in the lives of his patients. He was a compassionate man, driven by a desire to alleviate suffering and bring comfort to those in need. The stories of the crying child were nothing more than superstitions to him, tales spun from fear and uncertainty. On his first day, Arjun was struck by the oppressive atmosphere of the hospital. The air seemed heavy with sorrow, and the shadows danced eerily along the wall. As he made his rounds, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes followed his every move. Arjun's first encounter with the crying child happened late one night as he made his way through the deserted corridors. He had stayed behind to review patient charts, lost in thought as he walked. Suddenly, he heard it, the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing from somewhere nearby. Arjun paused, his heart pounding in his chest. The laughter seemed to come from all directions, surrounding him like a cloak of darkness. He searched frantically for the source, but the corridors were empty, the rooms silent and still. As the laughter faded into the distance, Arjun felt a chill run down his spine. He brushed it off as a figment of his imagination and continued on his way, but the memory of the eerie encounter lingered in his mind. The next day, Arjun decided to inquire about the crying child. He approached Priya, a veteran nurse who had worked at the hospital for many years. Priya was known for her no-nonsense demeanor and her wealth of knowledge about the hospital's history. "Priya, can I ask you something?" Arjun began, hesitant to broach the subject. "Do you know anything about the crying child?" Priya's expression darkened, and she glanced around cautiously before responding. "Ah, you've heard it too, haven't you? The crying child. What is it?" Arjun pressed, his curiosity piqued. Priya hesitated, her gaze distant. "They say it's the spirit of a child who died here long ago. No one knows for sure, but the sounds, they're impossible to ignore." Arjun listened intently, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The hospital's history was rife with tragedy and loss, and the idea of a restless spirit wandering its halls sent a shiver down his spine. Determined to learn more, Arjun delved into the hospital's archives. He found old records and newspaper clippings that hinted at the existence of the crying child, a child who had been admitted to the hospital under mysterious circumstances and had passed away under even stranger ones. But there were no concrete answers, only whispers and speculation. Arjun's investigation led him to an old journal kept by one of the hospital's former doctors. In it, the doctor wrote of hearing the sounds of a child crying late at night, his words filled with a sense of unease and dread. "It's as if the hospital itself mourns for the lost souls within its walls," the doctor wrote in one entry. The cries of the child echo through the corridors, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life. As Arjun delved deeper into the mystery, the sightings of the crying child increased. Patients reported hearing the sounds late at night, their faces pale with fear. Staff members spoke of unexplained phenomena, objects moving on their own, lights flickering inexplicably. The atmosphere in the hospital grew tense, the fear palpable. One night, Arjun was called to the pediatric ward for an emergency. A young patient was in distress, her condition rapidly deteriorating. As Arjun rushed to her bedside, he heard it, the sound of a child crying, faint but unmistakable. He glanced around the room, but there was no one there. The other patients slept soundly, and the nurses were busy attending to their duties. Arjun's heart raced as he tried to shake off the feeling of dread that settled over him. Determined to understand the phenomenon, Arjun sought the assistance of Akash, a renowned paranormal investigator. Akash arrived at the hospital with a team of experts and a plethora of equipment designed to detect supernatural activity. They interviewed staff and patients, collecting their stories and experiences. The evidence was compelling. EVP recordings of a child's voice, cold spots, and inexplicable electromagnetic reading. "It's definitely paranormal," Akash confirmed. "The sounds are coming from somewhere, but we can't trace their origin." "But why now?" Arjun asked. "Why has the activity increased?" "Something has stirred up the spirits," Akash replied. "It could be a recent tragedy, a change in the hospital's environment, or even the presence of someone sensitive to the supernatural. We need to find out what's causing it." One night, Arjun stayed late, reviewing the hospital's records once more. As he sifted through the documents, a pattern began to emerge, a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances, all linked to sightings of the crying child. The child's presence seemed to coincide with moments of great sorrow and despair, as if drawn to the pain and suffering of those within the hospital's walls. Arjun shared his findings with Akash, and they decided to conduct a seance to communicate with the spirit directly. They gathered in a quiet room, the air thick with anticipation. Akash led the seance, his voice steady and confident. "Child spirit, we are here to help you find peace," Akash said, his words echoing through the room. "Please tell us what you need." The room grew colder, and a faint light appeared, coalescing into the form of a young child. Her eyes were filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. "I must find my mother," the child's voice trembled. "She left me here, and I can't find her." Arjun's heart ached at the child's words. "We'll help you," he promised, his voice gentle. "We'll do everything we can to reunite you with your mother." The child's form flickered, and for a moment it seemed as if she might find the peace she sought. But then the room was filled with a sudden violent energy. The windows shattered, and a chilling scream echoed through the halls. The child's form twisted and distorted, her face contorted with rage and sorrow. "She doesn't want to leave," Akash shouted over the din. "She's too consumed by her grief and her longing." The seance ended abruptly, the room returning to its eerie silence. The crying child had vanished, but her presence lingered, a heavy weight on Arjun's shoulders. The hospital's atmosphere grew darker, the sightings of the child more frequent and intent. Patients and staff alike felt her anguish, and the hospital's once sterling reputation began to suffer. Arjun knew he had to find a way to help the crying child move on, but the task seemed insurmountable. The more he learned, the more he realized that her spirit was a manifestation of unresolved grief and a desperate need for closure. Determined to end the haunting, Arjun decided to confront the crying child spirit one last time. He returned to the quiet room, this time alone. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Called out, his voice steady but filled with compassion. "You don't need to do this anymore. Your time here is over. Let us help you find peace." The crying child appeared, her form more solid than ever before. Her eyes were filled with an unbearable sadness. "I can't leave," she said, her voice trembling. "I must find my mother." "You will," Arjun promised, tears glistening in his eyes. "We'll help you find her, I promise." The ghostly figure hesitated, her form flickering. For a moment it seemed as if she might find the peace she so desperately sought. But then her eyes darkened and she let out a piercing scream. The room was filled with a blinding light, and Arjun was thrown back by an unseen force. Arjun woke in the hospital's emergency room, his head throbbing and his vision blurry. Priya and Akash were by his side, their faces etched with concern. "What happened?" Arjun asked, his voice weak. "You confronted her alone," Priya said, shaking her head. "It was too dangerous." "I had to try," Arjun said, tears streaming down his face. "She's suffering so much." "We'll find another way," Akash assured him, but his voice lacked conviction. The haunting had taken its toll on everyone, and the hospital seemed darker and more foreboding with each passing day. Despite their efforts, the haunting continued. The crying child remained a constant presence, her sorrow and longing echoing through the halls of the hospital. Patients and staff continued to report sightings, and the sense of unease grew. Arjun recovered from his injuries but was forever changed by his experience. He continued his work, driven by a determination to help those in need, but the shadow of the crying child hung over him. The hospital was no longer just a place of healing, it was a place haunted by its past, its walls echoing with the cries of a spirit that could not find peace. Years passed, and the legend of the crying child endured. New staff members were told the story during their orientation, and patients whispered of ghostly encounters in the dead of night. Dr. Arjun became a revered figure at the hospital, known not just for his medical skill, but for his compassion and understanding of the supernatural. He often found himself gazing down the dimly lit halls, half expecting to see the ghostly figure of the crying child. And sometimes, late at night, he would catch a glimpse of a young girl in a hospital gown out of the corner of his eye, a fleeting shadow that sent a chill down his spine. The crying child was still there, a silent guardian of the hospital's darkest secrets, her story a haunting reminder that some spirits can never truly rest. In the end, the legend of the crying child left the city with an unsettling question: what other secrets lay hidden within the walls of the hospital, waiting to be uncovered? And would they too demand their own reckoning? The mystery remained, a dark and tantalizing puzzle that beckoned those brave enough to seek the truth, leaving everyone with the feeling that the story was far from over. Chapter 4: The Haunted Morgue. The hospital was a labyrinth of corridors and wards, each echoing with the hushed whispers of the park. By day, it was a bustling hive of activity, filled with the sounds of beeping machines and hurried footsteps. By night, however, it transformed into a silent, shadowy realm where every creak and rustle seemed magnified. It was in the bowels of this hospital, in the cold, dimly lit depths of the morgue, that the most chilling stories emerged. Claire had been a nurse at the hospital for nearly a decade. She had seen it all: births, deaths, and everything in between. The stories about the haunted morgue were just that to her stories. She had always dismissed the tales of ghostly activity as nothing more than the overactive imaginations of her colleagues. That was until she was assigned the night shift in the emergency department, a position that frequently brought her near the morgue. The first night, she felt an unsettling chill as she passed the heavy steel door leading to the morgue. The temperature always seemed to drop a few degrees near it, but Claire attributed it to the refrigeration units inside. As she continued her rounds, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She dismissed it, focusing instead on the tasks at hand. It was near midnight when Claire first heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. She paused, straining to hear more. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of the morgue. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the door. She pressed her ear against it, but the whispering stopped. Shaking her head, she decided it was just her mind playing tricks on her. As the weeks went by, the strange occurrences became more frequent. Claire would find herself walking past the morgue, only to hear soft thuds from within. Once she even saw the shadowy outline of a figure through the small window in the door. When she opened it, the room was empty, the silence oppressive. Claire confided in her friend and fellow nurse Lisa about her experiences. Lisa's eyes widened with a mix of fear and excitement. "They say the spirits of the deceased linger in the morgue," Lisa whispered, "especially those who met violent or unexpected deaths. Maybe they're trying to communicate with you." Claire scoffed, but the unease gnawing at her suggested otherwise. Determined to put her fears to rest, she decided to investigate further. One particularly quiet night, Claire armed herself with a flashlight and a digital recorder, hoping to capture any unusual activity. She waited until the hospital was at its quietest, then made her way to the morgue. She took a deep breath and opened the door, the cold air enveloping her like a shroud. The room was as she expected, stark, sterile, and unnervingly silent. She set the recorder on one of the steel tables and turned it on. The red light blinked steadily, a small beacon in the darkness. Claire began to speak, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone here? Can you hear me?" For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, the temperature dropped even further, and she felt a presence behind her. She turned abruptly, but the room was empty. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She asked again, "If there's someone here, please give me a sign." A sudden clang echoed through the room as one of the drawers where bodies were stored slammed shut. Claire jumped, her heart racing. She moved towards the drawer, her flashlight beam steady despite her shaking hands. She pulled it open, but it was empty. She decided she had enough and retrieved the recorder. Her steps hurried as she left the morgue. Back in the break room, she played back the recording. Most of it was static, but then she heard it, an indistinct whisper, barely audible. She played it again, straining to make out the words, "Help, ma'am." Claire's blood ran cold. She had captured a voice, a plea from beyond the grave. She knew she couldn't ignore it. There was a spirit in the morgue that needed her help. The next night, Claire returned to the morgue, this time with Lisa for support. Together, they set up the recorder and a small camera, hoping to capture more evidence. They repeated the same questions, but this time the responses were immediate. The temperature plummeted and a dense fog seemed to fill the room. Claire and Lisa exchanged nervous glances but continued. Suddenly, the camera picked up a faint figure, a woman in a hospital gown, her face contorted in anguish. The figure pointed towards one of the drawers before vanishing. Claire's hands shook as she opened the indicated drawer. Inside, she found a file, yellowed with age. It contained the records of a patient named Evelyn, who had died under mysterious circumstances. Her death had been ruled an accident, but there were discrepancies in the report. Claire felt a pang of sorrow as she read about Evelyn's tragic end. "We need to find out what really happened to her," Claire said, her voice firm despite her fear. Over the next few days, Claire and Lisa dug into the hospital's archives, uncovering a web of negligence and malpractice. Evelyn had been a victim of a botched surgery, covered up by the hospital to avoid a scandal. Her spirit had been trapped in the morgue, seeking justice for her untimely death. Claire and Lisa took their findings to the hospital administration. At first, they were met with skepticism, but the evidence was undeniable. An investigation was launched, and the truth about Evelyn's death was finally acknowledged. The hospital made a public apology, and changes were implemented to ensure such a tragedy would never happen again. With Evelyn's story brought to light, the haunting in the morgue seemed to cease. The air felt lighter, and the sense of unease that had pervaded the area dissipated. Claire felt a sense of accomplishment, having helped a restless spirit find peace. But the hospital's shadows still held many secrets. One night, as Claire walked past the morgue, she felt a familiar chill. The temperature dropped, and she heard the faint sound of whispering. Her heart sank. It wasn't over. The spirits of the deceased still lingered, their stories waiting to be told. She knew then that her journey was far from complete. The haunted morgue was just one chapter in the hospital's dark history. There were other spirits, other restless souls trapped within its walls. Claire steeled herself, ready to uncover the next mystery. The hospital stood as a silent witness to countless lives and deaths, its walls steeped in memories both joyous and tragic. In the quiet of the night, when shadows danced and whispers filled the air, Claire remained vigilant. She would be there, listening, ready to help the lost souls find their way. And so, the legend of the haunted morgue lived on, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between life and death. The hospital, a place of healing, also harbored the echoes of those who had suffered within its wall. The spirits were still there, waiting in the darkness, their stories begging to be heard. Claire knew that as long as she was there, she would continue to listen, continue to help. The hospital's haunted history was far from over, and she was determined to uncover every secret, no matter how terrifying. The journey had just begun, and the shadows still held many more stories yet to be told. Chapter 5. The Nurse from Another Era. The hospital was a sprawling complex, its austere facade belying the intricate web of stories that lurked within its wall. By day, it was a place of healing and recovery, a testament to human resilience and medical science. By night, however, it transformed into a realm where shadows danced and whispered secrets from the past. Among the myriad tales that circulated, none were as enduring or as mysterious as the legend of the nurse from another era. Sarah had been a nurse at the hospital for 5 years, drawn to the profession by a desire to help others and a fascination with the human condition. She loved the hustle and bustle of the day shifts, the camaraderie with her colleagues, and the satisfaction of seeing her patients recover. But when she was assigned to the night shift, she quickly realized that the hospital took on a different character after dark. On her first night shift, Sarah noticed the change immediately. The bustling halls were now quiet, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The silence was interrupted only by the occasional beeping of monitors and the distant murmur of voices from the on-call room. It was during these quiet hours that Sarah first heard about the ghostly nurse. It was Emily, a seasoned nurse with a penchant for storytelling, who first mentioned her. "They say she's been here since the hospital was built," Emily said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Dressed in an old-fashioned uniform with a starched white apron and cap. She appears to be going about her duties as if she were still alive, helping patients and comforting those in need." Sarah was intrigued, but skeptical. She had always considered herself a rational person, not prone to believing in ghost stories. But as the night wore on, she found herself thinking about the mysterious nurse more and more. It was around 2 a.m. when Sarah had her first encounter. She was making her rounds, checking on patients in the dimly lit rooms when she saw her. The nurse was at the far end of the hallway, her figure silhouetted against the light from a nearby window. She was dressed exactly as Emily had described, an old-fashioned uniform, complete with a starched white apron and cap. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, certain that her eyes were playing tricks on her, but the figure remained. The nurse moved with purpose, her steps soundless as she glided down the hall. Sarah felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, as if the nurse's presence was somehow comforting. She followed the nurse, her curiosity piqued. The figure stopped at the room of an elderly patient, Mrs. Whitfield, who had been admitted with severe pneumonia. Sarah watched as the nurse gently adjusted the blankets around Mrs. Whitfield, her movements tender and reassuring. Then, without a word, the nurse turned and disappeared into the shadows. Sarah hurried to Mrs. Whitfield's side. The old woman, who had been restless and feverish all night, was now sleeping peacefully, a serene expression on her face. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Who was this mysterious nurse, and why did she seem so intent on helping the patients? Over the next few weeks, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the ghostly nurse. She spoke to other night shift workers and discovered that many of them had their own stories. There was Dr. Sam, who claimed the nurse had appeared during a particularly difficult surgery, guiding his hands when he was about to make a fatal error. Then there was Lisa, a fellow nurse, who swore she had seen the nurse comforting a distraught mother in the pediatric ward. Despite the numerous sightings, no one knew who the nurse was or why she was haunting the hospital. Some believed she was the spirit of a nurse who had died tragically during a flu epidemic in the early 1900s. Others thought she was a guardian spirit, watching over the hospital and its patients. Sarah's curiosity soon turned into an obsession. She spent her nights searching for the nurse, hoping to learn more about her. She scoured the hospital archives, looking for records of a nurse who matched the description. But the old records were incomplete, and she found nothing definitive. One night, while digging through a dusty box of old files, Sarah found a photograph. It was a group picture of the hospital staff from the early 1900s. In the back row, standing tall and proud, was the ghostly nurse. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the familiar figure. On the back of the photograph, a name was scrawled in faded ink: Nurse Margaret. Armed with this new information, Sarah delved deeper into the hospital's history. She learned that Nurse Margaret had been a dedicated nurse who had worked tirelessly during the flu epidemic of 1918. She had cared for countless patients, often putting their needs above her own. Tragically, she had succumbed to the flu herself, dying in the very hospital where she had devoted her life. Sarah felt a deep connection to Nurse Margaret. She admired her dedication and compassion, and she was determined to understand why her spirit lingered. She began to leave small offerings in the places where she had seen the ghostly nurse: a bouquet of fresh flowers, a handwritten note of thanks, a candle to light her way. Each time she felt a sense of presence, as if Nurse Margaret was acknowledging her gestures. One stormy night, the hospital was eerily quiet. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the power flickered intermittently. Sarah was making her rounds when she felt a sudden drop in temperature. She turned to see Nurse Margaret standing at the end of the hall, her figure illuminated by a flash of lightning. This time the nurse didn't disappear. Instead, she beckoned to Sarah, her expression urgent. Sarah's heart pounded as she followed the ghostly figure, who led her to a room in the pediatric ward. Inside, a young boy named Timmy was struggling to breathe, his face pale and sweaty. Sarah's training kicked in, and she immediately began to administer emergency care. As she worked, she felt a calming presence beside her, guiding her actions. Timmy's breathing gradually stabilized and his color began to return. Sarah looked up to see Nurse Margaret watching her, a faint smile on her lips. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The next morning, Timmy's parents thanked Sarah profusely, tears of relief in their eyes. Sarah knew that Nurse Margaret had played a crucial role in saving the boy's life. She felt a profound sense of gratitude and a renewed determination to uncover the full story of the ghostly nurse. Sarah's search for answers led her to an old, retired doctor named Dr. Thompson, who had worked at the hospital for over 50 years. When she mentioned Nurse Margaret, the elderly doctor's eyes widened in surprise. "I haven't heard that name in decades," Dr. Thompson said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "She was a legend even when I started here. They say she was the heart and soul of this hospital during the flu epidemic." Dr. Thompson revealed that Nurse Margaret had been known for her extraordinary dedication and kindness. She had often worked double shifts, caring for patients long after her colleagues had gone home. Her death had been a devastating blow to the hospital staff, who had considered her a guardian angel. "Some say her spirit couldn't rest because she felt she had more work to do," Dr. Thompson mused. "Others believe she's here to watch over the hospital, ensuring that the patients receive the care they deserve." Sarah left the meeting with a sense of purpose. She was determined to honor Nurse Margaret's legacy by continuing her work and ensuring that every patient received the best possible care. She felt a renewed sense of dedication to her profession, inspired by the ghostly nurse's unwavering commitment. As the months passed, Sarah's encounters with Nurse Margaret became less frequent but more meaningful. Each time she saw the ghostly figure, it was a reminder of the hospital's history and the sacrifices made by those who had come before her. Sarah felt a deep connection to the past, as if she was part of a long line of caregivers who had dedicated their lives to helping others. One night, as Sarah was finishing her shift, she felt a familiar chill in the air. She turned to see Nurse Margaret standing in the doorway, her expression serene. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with emotion. The ghostly nurse nodded, a look of gratitude in her eyes. Then she slowly faded away, leaving Sarah with a sense of peace. The hospital continued to function as a place of healing, its halls filled with the stories of countless patients and staff. The legend of the ghostly nurse remained a part of its lore, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who had dedicated their lives to helping others. But for Sarah, the story was far from over. She knew that the hospital held many more secrets, and she was determined to uncover them. The presence of Nurse Margaret had awakened something in her, a desire to understand the mysteries of the past and to honor the legacy of those who had come before her. As she walked the quiet halls at night, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation. The hospital was a place of healing, but it was also a place of whispers and shadows, where the past and present intertwined in a dance of life and death. And in the depths of the night, when the shadows seemed to come alive, she would be there, ready to uncover the next chapter in the hospital's haunted history. The ghostly nurse had shown her the way, but there were still many stories left to tell. And so, with a sense of determination and a heart full of compassion, Sarah continued her journey, ready to face whatever came next. The hospital's haunted history was far from over, and she was determined to uncover every secret, no matter how terrifying. In the end, the hospital remained a place of healing and mystery, its walls echoing with the stories of those who had walked its halls. And as long as there were stories left to uncover, Sarah knew she would be there, listening to the whispers of the past, ready to help the lost souls find their way. The journey had just begun, and the shadows still held many more stories yet to be told. Chapter 6. The Faucet. The hospital, with its sprawling wings and labyrinthine corridors, had always been a place of whispers and half-forgotten legends. My day, it thrummed with the energy of doctors, nurses, and patients moving through their routine. By night, however, it transformed into a silent, eerie place where shadows stretched long and darkness seemed to breathe. It was during these hushed hours that the most unsettling stories came to life. Elena had been a nurse at the hospital for 6 years. She was known for her calm demeanor and dedication to her patients. She had worked every shift imaginable, but the night shift had always unnerved her. There was something about the quiet, the stillness that made her skin prickle. But Elena prided herself on her rationality, dismissing the ghost stories her colleagues told as mere superstition. One particularly quiet night, Elena was working with Tom, a CNA who had been at the hospital even longer than she had. They were walking down the dimly lit hallways of the long-term care wing, chatting to pass the time, when a sudden sound interrupted their conversation. The unmistakable noise of running water echoed down the corridor. Tom stopped mid-sentence, his face paling. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded, her brow furrowing. "Everyone's in bed. There's no reason for any water to be running." They followed the sound to the bathroom, a small room accessible only by key. Elena fumbled for her key card, her heart beating a little faster. She had heard stories about this particular bathroom, stories of lights turning on and off by themselves, of objects moving inexplicably. She had always laughed them off. But now, standing outside the locked door with the sound of rushing water growing louder, she wasn't so sure. Elena unlocked the door and pushed it open. The bathroom was dark, the only light coming from the hallway behind them. She reached inside and flipped the switch. The fluorescent lights flickered on, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the room. The source of the noise was immediately apparent. The faucet of the bathtub was turned on full blast, water gushing into the tub. Elena approached the tub, her footsteps echoing in the small, tiled room. She reached out and turned the faucet off, the handle stiff under her hand. The water slowed to a trickle and then stopped, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. "Why was this on?" Elena muttered to herself more than to Tom. "Everyone's in bed, and it takes a key to get in here." Tom, who had been standing in the doorway, took a hesitant step inside. "Strange stuff happens in this bathroom all the time," he said, his voice hushed. "Lights turning on and off, things moving around. I've heard stories from other CNAs and nurses who've worked here longer than I have." Elena turned to face him, her expression skeptical. "You're not serious." "I am," Tom insisted. "One night I heard someone crying in here. I unlocked the door, but when I came in, the room was empty. Another time, I saw the light flicker on and off by itself." Elena shook her head, trying to dispel the chill that had settled over her. "There's got to be a logical explanation for this. Maybe a faulty faucet or something." Tom shrugged, but his eyes were wary. "Maybe, but there are stories about this place. Stories about things that can't be explained." Elena tried to push the encounter out of her mind, but the memory of the running water lingered. Over the next few nights, she found herself glancing down the hallway towards the bathroom, half expecting to hear the water again. She didn't, but other strange things began to happen. Lights flickered in empty rooms. Items left on counters were found on the floor, and always there was the feeling of being watched. One night, Elena was alone in the nurses' station, reviewing patient charts. The rest of the staff were busy tending to patients, and the ward was unusually quiet. She was deep in concentration when she heard it again, the sound of water running. She froze, her heart thudding in her chest. Slowly, she stood and walked towards the bathroom, her steps cautious. The door was locked, just as it had been before. She unlocked it and pushed it open, half expecting to find the faucet turned on again. But the bathroom was silent, the faucet dry. She sighed in relief, convinced that her mind was playing tricks on her. She turned to leave, but as she did, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She fumbled for the light switch, her fingers trembling. The lights flickered back on, revealing an empty room. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in the mirror, a shadowy figure standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Her heart racing, Elena fled the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. She leaned against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She knew what she had seen, but she couldn't bring herself to believe it. Elena confided in Tom the next night. He listened quietly, nodding as she described the shadowy figure in the mirror. "You're not the first to see something like that," he said. "There are stories about a patient who died in that bathroom years ago. They say she drowned herself in the tub and her spirit still lingers." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Why would she be haunting the bathroom? "Maybe she can't move on," Tom suggested. "Maybe she's trapped, reliving her last moments over and over." Elena couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her. She began to avoid the bathroom, taking the long way around to avoid passing it. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the sense that she was being watched. One night, as she was finishing her shift, Elena heard the sound of water running again. She tried to ignore it, but the noise grew louder, more insistent. She knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. Taking a deep breath, she walked towards the bathroom. Her steps deliberate. The door was unlocked this time, the sound of running water echoing through the hallway. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The faucet was on full blast, water gushing into the tub. But this time, there was something else, an icy mist that seemed to hang in the air, making her skin prickle. Elena approached the tub, her breath visible in the cold air. She reached out to turn off the faucet, but as she did, the lights flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and she felt a cold hand grip her wrist. She gasped, trying to pull away, but the grip tightened. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, the air around her growing colder. She knew she had to get out, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just as she thought she would pass out, the lights flickered back on, and the grip on her wrist loosened. She stumbled back, her heart pounding. The room was empty, the faucet turned off, but she knew what she had felt, what she had seen. Elena fled the bathroom, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't continue to ignore what was happening. She had to find a way to help the spirit move on, to free her from whatever torment was keeping her trapped. Elena spent the next few days researching the hospital's history, looking for any information about the patient who had died in the bathroom. She discovered that her name was Rebecca, a young woman who had been admitted to the hospital for severe depression. She had drowned herself in the tub, unable to cope with her despair. Elena felt a pang of sympathy for Rebecca. She knew she had to find a way to help her. She spoke to a local historian who specialized in the supernatural, hoping to find some answers. The historian, a kind elderly woman named Martha, listened carefully as Elena described her encounters. "Spirits like Rebecca are often trapped by their own emotions," Martha explained. "She may be reliving her last moments, unable to move on because of the pain and despair she felt. What can I do to help her?" Elena asked, desperate for a solution. Martha smiled gently. "Sometimes all it takes is a gesture of kindness, a way to show the spirit that they are not alone. You could try leaving something that belonged to her, or a message of comfort. It might be enough to help her find peace." Elena thanked Martha and returned to the hospital, determined to help Rebecca. She searched the archives for any personal belongings that might have been left behind. She found a small, faded photograph of Rebecca, her expression somber but beautiful. That night, Elena placed the photograph on the sink in the bathroom, along with a handwritten note of comfort. She lit a small candle and whispered a prayer for Rebecca, hoping that it would be enough. For a few nights there was nothing. The bathroom remained silent, the faucet dry. Elena began to think that her gesture had worked, that Rebecca had found peace. But then, on the fourth night, she heard the water running again. She walked to the bathroom, her heart heavy. The door was ajar, the sound of running water loud in the silent hallway. She stepped inside, the cold mist enveloping her. The faucet was on full blast, water gushing into the tub. Elena approached the tub, her breath visible in the frigid air. She reached out to turn off the faucet, but before she could, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Rebecca standing behind her. her expression one of sorrow and longing. "Please," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me." Elena's heart ached for the tormented spirit. "What do you need? How can I help you?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I can't move on. I'm trapped in my despair. I need to find peace." Elena nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I'll help you, Rebecca. I'll find a way." The lights flickered, and Rebecca's figure began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered before disappearing completely. Elena knew she had to act quickly. She reached out to Martha again, explaining what had happened. Martha suggested a cleansing ritual, a way to release Rebecca's spirit from its torment. The following night, Elena gathered the necessary items for the ritual: a white candle, sage for smudging, and a bowl of salt water. She returned to the bathroom, her heart pounding with anticipation. She lit the candle and began to smudge the room with sage, the fragrant smoke filling the air. As she worked, she whispered a prayer for Rebecca, asking for her spirit to be released from its pain. She sprinkled the salt water around the room, creating a protective barrier. The room grew colder, the air thick with tension. Elena continued the ritual, her voice steady despite her fear. She could feel Rebecca's presence, a cold, sorrowful energy that filled the room. Finally, she placed the photograph and the note on the sink, the candle burning brightly beside them. "Rebecca," she called out, her voice firm, "you are not alone. You are loved, and you deserve peace. It's time to move on." The lights flickered, and Elena felt a rush of cold air. She closed her eyes, praying that her words would be enough. When she opened her eyes, the room was silent. The air was still, the coldness gone. The faucet was off, the water no longer running. Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her, a calm that she hadn't felt in weeks. She knew that Rebecca had found her peace, that her spirit had finally moved on. Elena left the bathroom, closing the door behind her. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that she had helped a lost soul find rest. But as she walked down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital still held many secrets, many spirits trapped by their own pain and despair. She knew that her work was far from over, that there were still stories left to uncover, spirits left to help. Elena continued her work, determined to bring peace to the restless spirits that haunted the hospital. She knew that the journey would be long and difficult, but she was ready to face whatever came next. The hospital's haunted history was far from over, and she was determined to uncover every secret, no matter how terrifying. In the end, the hospital remained a place of healing and mystery, its walls echoing with the stories of those who had walked its hall. And as long as there were stories left to uncover, Elena knew she would be there, listening to the whispers of the past, ready to help the lost souls find their way. The journey had just begun, and the shadows still held many more stories yet to be told. Chapter 7. Still here. Antonio Navarro had been a nurse at the hospital for 5 years, but nothing could have prepared him for the events that unfolded in the ICU one fateful night. The ward was dimly lit, the soft hum of medical equipment filling the air. Antonio made his rounds, checking on each patient with meticulous care. But it was room that sent a shiver down his spine. Inside lay a frail, elderly woman named Isabella. She was from a small village in the Spanish countryside, her weathered face marked by years of hardship. Isabella had been admitted a few days earlier after collapsing at home, and since then she had been in a state of semi-consciousness, murmuring incoherent phrases and repeating whatever was said to her. Antonio approached her bed, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. Isabella lay still, her eyes closed as if in a deep sleep. Antonio checked her vital signs, noting the steady rhythm of her heartbeat on the monitor beside her. "Isabella," he said softly, hoping to rouse her from her slumber. "It's Antonio. I'm here to check on you." Isabella's eyes fluttered open, revealing the cloudy blue of cataracts. She blinked up at Antonio, her expression blank. "How are you feeling tonight?" Antonio asked, adjusting her IV drip. Isabella's lips parted, and to Antonio's surprise, she began to speak. "I died because of a narcotic overdose," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I died because I took too much insulin. I died on a sunny Sunday afternoon." Antonio froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard of patients hallucinating or experiencing delirium, but Isabella's words sent a chill down his spine. He glanced around the room, half expecting to see some ethereal presence lurking in the shadows. "What do you mean, Isabella?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. But Isabella didn't respond. She simply closed her eyes, sinking back into unconsciousness. Antonio stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then a sudden movement caught his eye, a flicker of movement in the corner of the room. He turned, his breath catching in his throat. But there was nothing there, just the empty hospital room bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. Shaking off his unease, Antonio finished his rounds and left Isabella's room, his mind racing with unanswered questions. He tried to put the encounter out of his mind, chalking it up to fatigue and stress. But as he made his way back to the nurse's station, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Hours passed, and the night grew darker. Antonio found himself drawn back to Isabella's room, a sense of unease gnawing at him. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, his pulse quickening as he approached her bed. "Isabella," he said softly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. "It's me again, Antonio." But Isabella didn't respond. She lay still, her breathing shallow and labored. Antonio checked her vitals, his hands trembling slightly. Suddenly, Isabella's eyes snapped open, and she looked up at the ceiling with a distant, glassy stare. Antonio's heart skipped a beat as she spoke, her voice hollow and distant. "They're all still there," she said, her words sending a chill down his spine. Antonio's blood ran cold. He felt a surge of panic rising within him, a primal instinct telling him to flee. Without another word, he turned and ran from the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of the nurse's station, his chest heaving with exertion. His colleagues looked up in surprise, concern etched on their faces. "Antonio, what's wrong?" one of them asked, her brow furrowed with worry. But Antonio couldn't find the words to respond. He simply shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's Isabella," he managed to say between breaths. She's not alone in there." His colleagues exchanged worried glances, but before they could respond, a voice cut through the silence. "It's the witching hour," came a soft voice from the darkness. Antonio's blood ran cold as he turned to see the blind patient from room standing in the doorway, his sightless eyes fixed on nothing. He shivered, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. "What do you mean?" Antonio asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The blind patient simply smiled, a knowing expression on his face. "The witching hour," he repeated. "It's the time when the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest, when the spirits walk among us." Antonio's heart raced as the implications of the blind patient's words sank in. He had always dismissed the stories of hauntings and supernatural occurrences, but now, faced with Isabella's cryptic words and the blind patient's eerie prophecy, he couldn't deny that something strange was happening in the hospital. As the night wore on, Antonio couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him. He knew that he would never forget the events of that night, that they would haunt him for the rest of his days. And as he watched the clock tick closer to the witching hour, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden within the hospital's walls, waiting to be uncovered. For Antonio Navarro, the night was far from over, and the darkness held more mysteries than he could ever imagine. Chapter 8. The Grey Nurse. I first heard about the Grey Nurse many years ago when I was a graduate nurse, working night duty for the first time on ward at Repat. As she only seemed to appear at night, the night duty staff shared their stories about their experiences with her. The Grey Nurse seemed to be very kind, putting blankets on patients when they were cold, helping them have a drink of water when they couldn't do it themselves, and even putting patients on a bedpan when the other nurses were busy. While most of the Grey Nurse's work was not witnessed, I remember the night duty nurses saying that they had occasionally caught glimpses of her. The wards in the Centaur wing had long corridors that were quite dark at night, and she had been seen down the end of the ward corridor before she turned a corner. Of course, when they went to look, there was never anybody there. Kylie's first night shift at the hospital began with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The whispers among the staff about the grey nurse were impossible to ignore. She had grown up in Australia amidst stories of folklore and urban legends, but the tale of the grey nurse was something she had never heard until now. "Just keep your head down and do your work," Lisa, a senior nurse, advised. "The grey nurse isn't harmful. She's actually quite helpful, but it's still unsettling." Kylie nodded, her curiosity piqued but also slightly unnerved. She made her rounds, checking on patients, adjusting their blankets and ensuring they were comfortable. The long, dimly lit corridors of the hospital were eerie, shadows playing tricks on her eyes as she moved from room to room. Halfway through her shift, Kylie thought she saw a figure at the end of the corridor. It was a fleeting glimpse, a hint of a grey uniform disappearing around the corner. She quickened her pace, turning the corner swiftly, but found only emptiness. During her break, Kylie sat with Lisa and a few other night shift nurses in the break room. The conversation inevitably turned to the grey nurse. "I've seen her a few times," Sam, an older nurse, said. "She helped one of my patients last week. The poor woman was freezing and I was swamped. When I finally got to her, she was tucked in with an extra blanket." "Have you ever spoken to her?" Kylie asked. Lisa shook her head. "No one has. She vanishes the moment you try to approach her." Intrigued, Kylie decided to do some research. She spent her days off in the hospital's archives, digging through old records and staff reports. She discovered that the grey nurse had first been mentioned over 50 years ago. According to legend, she was a nurse who had tragically died in the hospital, her spirit lingering to continue her duties. Kylie found an old photograph of a nurse in a grey uniform, her face kind but haunting. The name tag read Margaret. Weeks passed and Kylie grew more accustomed to her night shifts. The grey nurse became a comforting presence, her assistance invaluable during the busiest hours. Kylie's initial fear turned into a strange sense of companionship with the ghostly figure. One particularly stormy night, the hospital was thrown into chaos. The power flickered and the emergency generators kicked in. Kylie was tending to a critically ill patient when she felt a chill in the air. She turned to see the grey nurse standing at the foot of the bed, her eyes filled with a silent understanding. "Thank you," Kylie whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. The grey nurse nodded and vanished. Curiosity gnawed at Kylie. She needed to know more about Margaret and why her spirit remained. Her investigation led her to an old storage room in the hospital's basement, filled with forgotten files and dusty equipment. She found a box labelled Margaret and opened it. Inside were personal belongings, a diary, a locket, and a few letters. Kylie read through the diary, learning about Margaret's life. She was a dedicated nurse, loved by her patients and respected by her colleagues. But there was a darker side to her story. Margaret had uncovered a scandal involving a senior doctor who was mistreating patients. She had planned to expose him, but mysteriously died before she could. The diary hinted that her death might not have been accidental. Determined to uncover the truth, Kylie confronted Dr. Simon, the hospital's longest-serving doctor, who had been young when Margaret died. His reaction to her questions was evasive, his demeanor cold and defensive. "You should let the past stay buried," he warned. "Nothing good will come of this," but Kylie couldn't let it go. She continued her investigation, uncovering evidence of malpractice and cover-ups. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, and it became clear that Margaret had been murdered to keep her silent. One night, as Kylie was finishing her rounds, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to see the grey nurse standing in the corridor, her eyes filled with sorrow and gratitude. "I know what happened to you," Kylie said softly. "I'll make sure the truth comes out." The grey nurse nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. She reached out as if to touch Kylie, but her hand passed through her arm. In that moment, Kylie felt a cold rush of emotions, fear, pain, and an overwhelming sense of duty. Kylie gathered her evidence and presented it to the hospital board. The scandal that followed was enormous. Dr. Simon was suspended and an investigation was launched. The truth about Margaret's death finally came to light and her name was cleared. But the grey nurse did not disappear. She continued to help the night staff, her presence a constant reminder of the hospital's dark part. Kylie realized that some spirits linger not because they are trapped, but because their work is never truly done. Months passed, and the hospital slowly began to heal from the scandal. Kylie's connection to the grey nurse grew stronger, the ghostly figure appearing more frequently by her side. One particularly quiet night, Kylie was alone in the corridor when the grey nurse appeared. This time, there was a sense of finality in her presence. "Is it time for you to go?" Kylie asked. The grey nurse shook her head, her eyes filled with a silent plea. Kylie understood. There was still work to be done, patients to care for, and truths to uncover. The hospital's history was filled with shadows, and the grey nurse was a beacon of light in the darkness. Kylie never stopped searching for answers, her dedication to her patients unwavering. The grey nurse remained by her side, a silent guardian in the night. Together, they faced the hospital's challenges, uncovering secrets and righting wrongs. The legend of the grey nurse lived on, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the unending pursuit of justice. And as long as there were patients in need and stories to be told, the grey nurse would remain, her vigil never ending, her work never complete. And so, the corridors of the hospital continued to echo with whispers of the past, the grey nurse's presence a haunting reminder that some spirits never rest, their purpose eternal. The end.
Thanks for tuning in to our podcast. If you enjoyed our exploration of ghosts, mythical creatures, and urban legends, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling episodes. Until next time, my beloved listeners.